The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. The stars above seemed to shimmer with an intensity that was almost unnatural, as if they were trying to communicate something to the people below. But no one noticed. Life went on as usual. People hurried home from work, children played in the streets, and the hum of civilization continued uninterrupted. In a small observatory nestled in the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Evelyn Carter adjusted the lens of her telescope. She had been tracking an anomaly for weeks, a faint pulsating light that seemed to be growing brighter with each passing night. At first she thought it was a comet or perhaps a distant supernova, but the patterns didn't match anything she had ever seen before. "Evelyn, you've been at it for hours. You should get some rest," said Dr. Marcus Reed, her colleague and longtime friend. He leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed, concern etched on his face. "I can't, Marcus. Something's not right. This light, it's not natural. It's like it's alive," Evelyn replied, her voice tinged with both excitement and unease. Marcus walked over and peered through the telescope. The light was indeed pulsating, almost like a heartbeat. He frowned. "Have you reported this to anyone?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure. But I think it's time we—" Before she could finish, the light suddenly flared, brighter than anything they had ever seen. The entire observatory was bathed in an eerie, otherworldly glow. Evelyn and Marcus shielded their eyes, but the light seemed to penetrate through their hands, filling their vision with blinding whiteness. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. Evelyn blinked, trying to clear the spots from her vision. "What was that?" Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the sky, his face pale. Evelyn followed his gaze and felt her breath catch in her throat. Hovering above the Earth, just beyond the atmosphere, was a massive, sleek spacecraft. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, smooth, metallic, and glowing faintly with the same pulsating light Evelyn had been tracking. The ship was enormous, easily the size of a small city, and it seemed to be scanning the planet below. "We need to call someone." "The government, NASA, someone," Marcus said, his voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, but before she could move, the ship began to descend. It moved slowly at first, almost gracefully, but as it approached the Earth's surface, the air around it seemed to warp and distort. The ground beneath the observatory shook violently, and the sound of 1,000 thunderstorms filled the air. And then, with a deafening crash, the ship landed. The impact sent shockwaves rippling across the globe. Buildings crumbled, power grids failed, and chaos erupted in every major city. People screamed and ran in all directions, but there was nowhere to hide. The ship had landed in the heart of the United States, just outside of Denver, and its presence was felt by every living being on the planet. Evelyn and Marcus stumbled out of the observatory, their ears ringing from the explosion. The landscape around them had been transformed. Trees were uprooted, the ground was scorched, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. But what caught their attention was the ship itself. It was even more massive up close, towering over the landscape like a mountain. Its surface was smooth and reflective, almost like liquid metal, and it emitted a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn didn't answer. She was too busy watching as a section of the ship's surface began to ripple and shift. A doorway was forming, and from within, something was emerging. The first alien stepped out, and Evelyn felt her heart stop. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a slender humanoid body covered in a shimmering, iridescent exoskeleton. Its head was elongated, with large, almond-shaped eyes that glowed with an inner light. It moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, its long, delicate fingers twitching slightly as it surveyed the area. More aliens followed, each one identical to the first. They moved in unison, their movements precise and deliberate. Evelyn and Marcus stood frozen, unable to look away, and then the lead alien turned its gaze directly on them. Evelyn felt a wave of terror wash over her, but before she could react, the alien raised its hand. A beam of light shot out, enveloping her and Marcus in a warm, golden glow. For a moment, everything was still, and then the world went black. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was no longer outside. She was inside the ship, surrounded by the aliens. Marcus was beside her, unconscious but breathing. The interior of the ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. Walls that seemed to pulse with energy, floors that glowed faintly, and a sense of vastness that made her feel incredibly small. The lead alien approached her, its eyes locking onto hers. Evelyn felt a strange sensation, like a gentle pressure in her mind. And then she heard its voice. "We have come to save you," it said, its words echoing in her head. "But you must understand. Your world is in danger. A war is coming, and you must be prepared." Evelyn tried to speak, but no words came out. The alien continued, its voice calm but urgent. "We are not your enemies, but there are others who will stop at nothing to destroy you. You must trust us. You must prepare." And with that, the alien turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. The war had begun. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. The alien's words echoed in her head, a haunting refrain that sent chills down her spine. "A war is coming. You must prepare." She looked down at Marcus, who was still unconscious, his chest rising and falling steadily. The golden light that had enveloped them had left no visible marks, but Evelyn could feel a strange energy coursing through her veins, as if the encounter had changed something deep within her. The interior of the alien ship was vast and otherworldly. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing faintly with a rhythm that matched the hum of the ship itself. The air was cool and carried a faint metallic scent, but it was not unpleasant. Evelyn's scientific curiosity momentarily overrode her fear, and she reached out to touch the wall. It was smooth, almost glass-like, but warm to the touch, as if alive. "Marcus," she whispered, shaking him gently. "Marcus, wake up!" He groaned, his eyelids fluttering open. "Evelyn? Where are we?" "Inside the ship," she replied, her voice low. "They brought us in. They spoke to me." Marcus sat up slowly, rubbing his temples. "Spoke to you? How? What did they say?" Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to explain. "They didn't speak out loud. It was like they put the words directly into my mind. They said they've come to save us, but that a war is coming. They said we need to prepare." Marcus stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and fear. "A war? With who? Them?" "I don't think so," Evelyn said, shaking her head. "They said they're not our enemies, but there are others who want to destroy us." Before Marcus could respond, the wall in front of them shimmered and parted, revealing a doorway. The lead alien stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It gestured for them to follow. Evelyn and Marcus exchanged a glance. "Do we have a choice?" Marcus muttered. "I don't think so," Evelyn replied, standing up. She helped Marcus to his feet, and together they followed the alien down a long, glowing corridor. The corridor led to a large, circular chamber filled with what appeared to be holographic displays. Images of Earth floated in the air, along with strange symbols and diagrams that Evelyn couldn't decipher. Other aliens moved about the room, their movements precise and purposeful. The lead alien turned to them and raised its hand. Once again, Evelyn felt the gentle pressure in her mind as its voice echoed in her thoughts. "You are the chosen ones," it said. "You will carry our message to your people. Time is short. The others are already on their way." The others? Evelyn asked aloud, her voice trembling. Who are they? What do they want? The alien's gaze intensified, and Evelyn felt a flood of images and emotions rush into her mind. She saw vast, dark ships descending upon Earth, their surfaces jagged and menacing. She saw destruction on a scale she could barely comprehend, cities reduced to rubble, oceans boiling, the sky filled with fire. And she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a certainty that this future was inevitable, unless something was done. The others seek to harvest your world, the alien's voice continued. They do not negotiate. They do not reason. They consume. We have tried to stop them, but we are few. Your world is not ready, but it must fight. Evelyn staggered back, the weight of the vision nearly overwhelming her. Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. What did it show you? He asked, his voice urgent. The end, Evelyn whispered. The end of everything. The alien stepped. Closer, its gaze piercing. You must warn your people. You must unite them. Only together can you survive. But how? Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. How can we possibly fight something like that? The alien raised its hand again, and this time, a small glowing orb appeared in its palm. It floated toward Evelyn, hovering just in front of her. Take this. It contains the knowledge you will need. Use it wisely. Evelyn reached out and took the orb. It was warm and pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. As soon as she touched it, she felt a surge of information flood her mind. Blueprints, schematics, equations, and more. It was overwhelming, but she understood. This was the key to humanity's survival. Go now, the alien said. We will hold the others off as long as we can, but you must hurry. Before Evelyn or Marcus could respond, the floor beneath them began to glow. A beam of light enveloped them, and in an instant, they were no longer inside the ship. They found themselves standing on the outskirts of Denver, the alien ship looming in the distance. The city was in chaos. Fires burned, people screamed, and the sky was filled with smoke. But Evelyn knew there was no time to waste. We need to get to the authorities, she said, clutching the orb tightly. We need to tell them what's coming. Marcus nodded, his face pale but determined. Let's go. As they ran toward the city, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The others were coming, and the world was not ready. But she had the orb, and with it, a glimmer of hope. The war had begun, and humanity's fate hung in the balance. Evelyn and Marcus sprinted through the chaos, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The streets of Denver were a nightmare. Cars, abandoned, buildings crumbling, and people running in every direction, their faces etched with terror. The alien ship loomed in the distance, its pulsating light casting an eerie glow over the city. But Evelyn knew they couldn't stop to help anyone. Not yet. They had to deliver the orb and its message to someone who could make a difference. Where? Are we even going? Marcus shouted over the noise of collapsing structures and distant explosions. The capital, Evelyn yelled back. If we can get to the governor or the National Guard, we might have a chance. Marcus nodded, though his expression was doubtful. The city was in shambles, and the chances of finding anyone in authority seemed slim. But they had no other choice. As they neared the heart of the city, the devastation grew worse. The alien ship's arrival had triggered seismic activity, and the ground was littered with cracks and debris. Evelyn clutched the orb tightly, its warmth a constant reminder of the responsibility they now carried. The knowledge it contained was humanity's only hope, but it was useless if they couldn't get it into the right hands. Suddenly, a loud roar filled the air, and the ground shook violently. Evelyn and Marcus stumbled, barely keeping their balance. They turned to see a massive military convoy rolling into the city, tanks and armored vehicles leading the way. Soldiers poured out, their weapons at the ready, and began setting up barricades. This. Way! Evelyn shouted, pulling Marcus toward the soldiers. They approached a group of soldiers who were directing civilians to safety. One of them, a stern-looking officer with a radio in hand, noticed them and stepped forward. "You two, get to the evacuation zone, now." "We need to speak to whoever's in charge," Evelyn said, holding up the orb. "This is urgent. It's—" "About the aliens!" The officer frowned, his eyes narrowing as he studied the orb. "What the hell is that?" It's a message from them," Evelyn said, struggling to find the right words. "They're not the ones we need to worry about. There's something worse coming. We have to warn everyone." The officer hesitated, clearly unsure whether to believe her. But before he could respond, a loud, guttural sound echoed through the air, unlike anything Evelyn had ever heard. It was deep and resonant, like the growl of some massive beast, and it sent a shiver down her spine. The soldiers froze, their weapons trained on the sky. Evelyn and Marcus turned to see a dark, jagged shape emerging from the clouds. It was another ship, but this one was nothing like the sleek, glowing vessel of the first aliens. This ship was monstrous, its surface covered in sharp, angular protrusions that looked like blades. It radiated menace, and as it descended, the air grew colder. "What the hell is that?" the officer whispered, his voice trembling. "The others," Evelyn said, her heart pounding. "They're here." The dark ship unleashed a barrage of energy beams, striking the ground with terrifying precision. Buildings exploded and the soldiers scrambled for cover. Evelyn and Marcus ducked behind an overturned car as debris rained down around them. "We have to get out of here," Marcus shouted. "No," Evelyn said, clutching the orb. "We have to deliver this. It's the only way." The officer crawled over to them, his face pale but determined. "If you've got something that can help, now's the time to use it." Evelyn nodded and held up the orb. As soon as she did, it began to glow brighter, and a holographic image projected into the air. It showed a detailed schematic of the dark ship, along with a series of symbols and equations. The officer stared at it, his eyes wide. What is this?" he asked. "It's a weapon," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "A way to fight back. But we need to get this to someone who can build it. Fast." The officer hesitated for only a moment before grabbing his radio. "This is Lieutenant Harris. I need an immediate evac for 2 civilians carrying critical intel. Repeat, immediate evac." Within minutes, a helicopter appeared overhead, its rotors cutting through the smoke-filled air. The soldiers helped Evelyn and Marcus aboard, and as the helicopter lifted off, Evelyn looked down at the city. The dark ship was still wreaking havoc, but she felt a glimmer of hope. They had the knowledge to fight back. Now, they just had to use it. As the helicopter sped toward the nearest military base, Evelyn clutched the orb tightly. The war had begun, and humanity's survival depended on what they did next. The helicopter ride was a blur of noise and motion. Evelyn clutched the orb tightly, her mind racing with the weight of what they had to do. Marcus sat beside her, his face pale but determined. The pilot and co-pilot exchanged terse, urgent words over the radio, their voices barely audible over. "The roar of the rotors. ETA 5 minutes, the pilot shouted over his shoulder. "Hold on!" Evelyn glanced out the window. The military base came into view, a sprawling complex of hangars, barracks, and command centers. Soldiers were scrambling in every direction, their movements sharp and purposeful. The base was on high alert, and Evelyn could see rows of fighter jets being prepped for takeoff. The sight gave her a small measure of hope. If anyone could act on the information they carried, it was the people here. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad, and before the rotors had even stopped spinning, a group of soldiers approached. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp uniform stepped forward, his expression grim but focused. "I'm General Mitchell," he said, his voice commanding. "Lieutenant Harris radioed ahead. You have critical intel?" Evelyn nodded, holding up the orb. "This contains everything we need to fight back, but we don't have much time." General Mitchell studied the orb for a moment, then gestured for them to follow. "Come with me." They were led into a fortified command center, where dozens of officers and technicians were working furiously at banks of computers and communication equipment. The room buzzed with tension, and the air was thick with the smell of coffee and sweat. General Mitchell guided them to a large holographic display table in the center of the room. "Show me," he said simply. Evelyn placed the orb on the table, and it immediately activated, projecting a complex array of schematics, symbols, and data into the air. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look. "This is a weapon," Evelyn explained, her voice steady despite the pressure. "It's designed to target the other's ships. But it's not just a weapon, it's a shield too. It can protect us from their energy beams." General Mitchell leaned in, his eyes scanning the holographic display. "Can we build it?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "But it's going to take everything we've got. We'll need resources, manpower, and time, and we don't have much of that." "General." Mitchell straightened, his jaw set. "Then we'd better get started." He turned to his officers and began barking orders. "I want every engineer, scientist, and technician on this base working on this immediately. Pull in anyone with expertise in energy weapons, materials science, and aerospace engineering, and get me the president on the line, now." The room erupted into action, and Evelyn felt a surge of relief. They were finally being taken seriously. But as she watched the officers scramble to carry out their orders, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were already running out of time. Marcus leaned in close to her. "Do you think we can really do this?" he asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "We have to. There's no other choice." Over the next several hours, the base became a hive of activity. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock, deciphering the alien schematics and beginning the construction of the weapon. Evelyn and Marcus were kept close, their knowledge of the orb and its contents invaluable. But as the hours turned into days, the pressure mounted. Reports began to pour in from around the world. The others' ships were appearing everywhere. Their attacks relentless and devastating. Cities were falling, and the death toll was rising by the minute. The world was in chaos, and the need for the weapon was more urgent than ever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first prototype was completed. It was a massive, cylindrical device, bristling with energy conduits and alien technology. Evelyn stood in the hangar, staring at it with a mix of awe and trepidation. "This is it," General Mitchell said, standing beside her. "The first line of defense." "It has to work," Evelyn said quietly. "It just has to." As if on cue, an alarm blared through the base. "Incoming!" a voice shouted over the loudspeakers. "All personnel, brace for impact!" Evelyn and Marcus ran to the command center, where the holographic display showed a dark ship descending toward the base. The others had found them. "Deploy the weapon," General Mitchell ordered. The prototype was wheeled out onto the tarmac, its energy conduits humming to life. Evelyn watched as the dark ship loomed closer, its jagged surface glinting ominously in the sunlight. The weapon powered up, a beam of light shooting into the sky and striking the ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dark ship shuddered, its energy beams flickering and dying. A cheer went up from the soldiers, but Evelyn's relief was short-lived. The ship wasn't destroyed, it was only disabled. "It's not enough," she said, her heart sinking. "We need more power." General Mitchell turned to her, his expression grim. "Then we'll give it more. We're not giving up." As the base prepared for the next wave of attacks, Evelyn knew the fight was far from over. The others were relentless, but so were they. The war had begun, and humanity would not go down without a fight. The temporary victory against the dark ship was a spark of hope, but it was short-lived. The others were relentless, and their ships continued to descend upon Earth, each one more menacing than the last. The prototype weapon had proven that the aliens' technology could be countered, but it was clear that a single device wasn't enough. Humanity needed more weapons, more shields, and more time. Evelyn stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic display. The map of the world was lit up with red markers, each one representing an attack by the others. The situation was dire, but the base was working around the clock to replicate the weapon. Engineers and scientists from across the country had been brought in, and the hangar was now a bustling factory of innovation and desperation. "We've got the second prototype ready for testing," Marcus said, joining her at the display. His face was drawn, dark circles under his eyes, but his voice was steady. "If we can mass-produce these, we might stand a chance." Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The orb had given them the blueprints, but it had also shown her something else. A vision of a larger, more powerful weapon. A weapon capable of not just disabling the other ships, but destroying them entirely. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone yet, not even Marcus. The cost of building such a weapon would be staggering, and she wasn't sure humanity was ready to pay it. "Evelyn," Marcus said, pulling her from her thoughts. "You've been quiet. What's going on?" She hesitated, then sighed. "There's something else. The orb. It showed me a way to build a superweapon, something that could end this war. But it's not going to be easy." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "It requires a power source we don't have," Evelyn explained. "Something called a quantum singularity. It's basically a controlled black hole. The energy output would be immense, but creating one, it's risky. If we lose control, it could destroy everything." Marcus stared at her, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "That's insane, but if it works..." "If it works, we could win," Evelyn said. "But if it fails, we'll lose everything." Before Marcus could respond, General Mitchell entered the room, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said. "The others are targeting our supply lines. They've taken out 3 of our factories, and we're running low on materials. If we don't get more resources soon, we won't be able to build enough weapons to make a difference." Evelyn's heart sank. Without the materials, even the superweapon would be impossible. "What about the other countries?" she asked. "Have they been able to replicate the technology?" General Mitchell shook his head. "Some are trying, but they're facing the same problems we are. The others are hitting everyone hard. We're on our own." Evelyn clenched her fists, her mind racing. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. Then, an idea struck her. "What about the first aliens?" she said. "The ones who gave us the orb. They said they'd hold the others off as long as they could. Maybe they can help us." Marcus's eyes widened. "You think they'd give us the materials we need?" "It's worth a shot," Evelyn said. "But we'd have to find them first." General Mitchell nodded. "Do it, whatever it takes." Evelyn and Marcus hurried to the hangar, where the orb was being kept. Evelyn placed her hand on it, and immediately, a new set of coordinates appeared in her mind. The first aliens were still out there, and they were close. "We need to go to them," Evelyn said. "But it's not going to be easy. The others are everywhere." Marcus grabbed her arm. "Then we'll go together. We've come this far, right?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Right. They gathered a small team of soldiers and prepared a transport vehicle, loading it with supplies and weapons. As they set out, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was their last chance. If they failed, the war would be lost. The journey was perilous. The others' ships patrolled the skies, and the roads were littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. But they pressed on, driven by the hope that the first aliens could help them turn the tide. Finally, they reached the coordinates, a remote, mountainous region far from any cities. As they approached, a familiar pulsating light appeared in the sky. The sleek, glowing ship of the first aliens descended, landing gracefully in a clearing. Evelyn stepped out of the vehicle, her heart pounding. The lead alien emerged, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "You have come," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. "We need your help," Evelyn said. "We're running out of time. The others are destroying us. We need the materials to build a weapon strong enough to stop them. The alien studied her for a moment, then nodded. We will give you what you need, but you must understand, the cost will be great. Evelyn frowned. What do you mean? The alien's gaze was piercing. To create the weapon you seek, you must harness the power of a quantum singularity. This will require a sacrifice. One of us must give our life to stabilize it. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Marcus, then back at the alien. There has to be another way. There is not, the alien said. But we are willing to make this sacrifice. Your world must survive. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Thank you. The alien turned and gestured toward the ship. Come. We do not have much time. As they boarded the ship, Evelyn felt a mix of hope and sorrow. The war was far from over, but they had a chance. A real chance. And for the first time since the others had arrived, she allowed herself to believe that they might actually win.